Welcome to your key discovery point. I am Burney from Nextpoint, joined by Doug Austin of eDiscovery today. Doug, this week you covered an intriguing opinion, which is actually back from March of 2025. So it's a few months old, but it's still very relevant today. This is an opinion that addresses whether a party has possession, custody, or control over documents in Slack. Now, you also link to another post from Kelly Twigger, our good friend, where she discusses this. And I agree with her. This opinion is very well written in the context of covering civil procedure rules and burdens. But I got to tell you, I've got several questions about how the opinion handles the production of documents from Slack. And I feel like even saying that is a little not specific enough, and it bothers me. So why don't you give us a little bit of context here, Doug?
Sure. And so, yeah, this was a ruling, as you mentioned, from several months ago. Hat tip to Kelly because she covered it and she was talking about it in a call I had with her recently. So I was like, oh, yeah,
Good.
this is definitely a case to get into. And there were several things being ruled on. I particularly focused on kind of the collaboration communication platforms, which were Slack
Right.
and Chatter. And for Slack communications, basically, it's a simple, really couple of sentences in a paragraph that address the whole discussion of Slack. It's
Right.
just like a whole lot of analysis here, not where basically the judge, in this case, Judge Godbee said, defendants explain they don't have possession, custody, or control of documents from Slack because their license never included message retrieval or exportation, and they didn't otherwise store or archive Slack messages. So then he proceeds to say, well, because they're not in their possession, custody, control, the court denies plaintiff's motion to compel the Slack documents. That's it. That's all he says. Now, we don't know if there's more discussion,
Right.
beyond that, but
Of
he
course.
doesn't get into it in the ruling here. That he basically just says that defendants say they don't have possession, custody, control. Now, I've had discussions with folks in the past that Slack does have different license options and different variations to
Right.
their licensing that don't always give you as much exportation capabilities as others do, like the enterprise licenses. But one of the things I've heard from two different people since I've covered this case is that basically with Slack, Slack provides the ability, chances are they might have been using like the Pro Edition, um, but
Right.
but two different people have said that if you contact Slack and demonstrate a legal or investigation need, they've enabled the full corporate export functionality for a limited period of time. So it's not
Oh,
like Slack isn't, willing to accommodate legal and investigative, situations for customers that might otherwise not have the normal export capabilities. So, and even the free licenses do have some export capabilities. So there is
right.
some you can export the public channels and things like that. So I don't know if Judge Godbee just simply took defendant's word for it here. Certainly the plaintiffs, at least as far as this ruling went, didn't provide an expert that says, no, they should be able to export. Here's what they can do. And
Right.
forth. We don't see that either. But to me, it's kind of one of those cases where this is unfortunately not a lot of analysis here, but certainly defendants should
Hmm.
be able to export at least some level of data out of Slack, even with a free license. And Slack has been historically willing to provide export capabilities for customers with a legal or investigations need.
You're touching on exactly some of the things that, itches my brain here, Doug, on this. So, I wanted to send this link to you before. Now, there's a lot of blog posts out there from many different companies that definitely talk about Slack collections and how to do Slack collections. This is one of the ones that I think is one of the best from Mimecast, although it could be out of date, right? This is already from November 2024. So as we all know in this, these APIs that Slack or Facebook or any of these companies deal with or offer today, they can change at a moment's notice. Well, Microsoft is a great example as well. But I thought
Right.
this was a good little grid that they had in this one post here. It talks exactly what you're saying with. If you have the free plan of Slack, well, you can go back to messages and file history within 90 days. If you go up to the Pro or the Business Plus or Enterprise Grid plan, you have unlimited. And this is a very short, simple kind of a grid here that just shows you what some of the options are depending upon the level of subscription that you have to Slack. And
Right.
in this other post that you mentioned from Kelly Trigger, she goes into some of this down here at the bottom on here too, which I think is great, because that's one of the things I'm disappointed about. Like, why didn't Judge Godby go into a little bit more detail? And again, I don't know what's going on to the back end, of course, but it just irks me because it's such a great like legal substantive argument, but it's like, wait a minute, there's so many technical questions here. Because, and maybe this might just be because of the the recent things that you and I have been doing. When we talk about, quote, documents in Slack, Doug, are we talking about files that you upload into Slack and they store on their own storage? Or within Slack, you can actually link to documents stored on Google Drive or OneDrive? For example, we do that a lot even at Nextpoint because we have a Google subscription. We also have a Slack subscription. And so we'll link to documents in different locations and not simply upload them to Slack. And it's those kinds of questions that kind of bother me as well, because if they are linking to something like a Google Drive, a subscription that the company, the defendants here, purchase, well, then I would think they do have possession, custody, control on that. And to your point, the other side, the plaintiffs may not have been able to provide some of those arguments. But again, once again, I feel like these are some of the technical itches that am not getting scratched here in some of these opinions.
Right. Yeah. And again, unfortunately, the ruling just doesn't have, any real discussion on it. Doesn't tell us what version they had, what have you. The grid you showed shows that, you can export at least public channels with the Pro plan, assuming, this company, according to one of the people who reached out to me, said they have a few hundred people. And even if it's just the sales team on it, chances are they probably have something, at least have something like the Pro plan. So you can go back to messages, from an unlimited time period. You can't maybe necessarily do the private messages, but that's where, again, you could have, where supposedly Slack will provide a temporary capability to do that for legal or investigative needs. So it's important for people to know that, that there is an ability, and it's important for requesting parties to know that if a producing party makes an argument, references this case, like is happening here, there should be a way to get to that data. And really, when you think about this case and the Hubbard v. Crow case we covered a while back, which was the podcast, possession, custody, or control, you would think that courts would say, if anything, they would say the podcast wasn't in possession, custody, control. Slack files were. It's flip-flop based on these two rulings. So possession, custody, control disputes are definitely on the rise, and for a lot of different types of files.
Great stuff there, and a good case to kind of, well, many of us keep a lot of these cases in our back pockets just because we're looking at sort of the trends here and what can happen. I will say this webinar that we did at Nextpoint is now almost maybe about 3 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago. So again, things could have changed, but we did a webinar entitled How to Master eDiscovery for Slack, Teams, and Other Collaboration Apps. So it's very generalized, but if some of this is kind of making your head spin a little bit of what Doug and I are talking about, this would be a great place to start. We'll make sure we have the link in the show notes there, because we do go through some of this exact same thing that Doug and I are talking about here, breaking down the Slack terminology. Doug, you mentioned like the private channels, and again, depending on your subscription level, the administrator may or may not have access even to some of those private channels, maybe just the public channels. I mean, there's a lot in there that are a little bit crazy. We cover the different tiers and to be aware of some of those aspects there as you're doing that. And then frankly, how those exports come out. That's a whole other thing. If they had to produce some of these documents, maybe the documents themselves would have been able to be produced, on their own. But then do you lose the link or the actual message where those documents were referenced? It's that kind of a thing, which we've always talked about in the context of email and attachments or hyperlink files. But we talk about that in this webinar as well. So we'll make sure we have the link to that. Wow, just great stuff, Doug. I'm glad you covered this because, again, it's one of these things that I'm thrilled to see that courts are addressing this. It is definitely things that are happening in the corporate world today and things that we need to have discussed. I'm gonna keep on going for, like, let's get a little more technical discussion in there as well.
Yes, and this is another example of bring your geek to court. If you've got
Yes, Judge Peck.
yeah, presumably, if there was a discussion here and requesting party had a technical person there to be able to say, oh no, they should be able to do this, this, and this, and contact Slack for this, then
Yeah.
you might have seen a different ruling. Again, we don't know the analysis and the discussion that happened beforehand, but certainly there wasn't any of it in the ruling itself.
Well, I'll slack you later, Doug. As always. So thanks for covering these things. Always good to talk with you, sir. And we'll talk with you next time.
All right, thanks, Brett. Thanks, everybody.